Welcome students. In today's session we will be doing part 2 of civics of unit 3, the state government. So now we move on to the state legislature. The constitution provides a legislature for every state. So that means laws, okay? For every state the constitution provides laws. Most of the states have only unicameral legislature, that is legislative assembly. So if you see, most of the states will have only one group where they make laws and they execute the laws, that is called as the legislative assembly. Whereas some states, they have bicameral legislatures, which is example Bihar, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So as I told you in the previous lesson itself, legislative or legislature, that means a group of people where they join together and they make laws for the state to function. The lower house, that is the legislative assembly, represents the people of the state. The upper house, legislative council, represents special interests like teachers, graduates and local government. So what do we find in legislative council? We have people who are good in teaching, graduates and even the local government people. So in Tamil Nadu, according to the strength of the legislative assembly, that is we have 234 members. The number of ministers may be up to 36, that is from here. From Tamil Nadu, we have 36, nearly 36 ministers, which is 15% of 234. The next we move on to the legislative assembly, which is called as the lower house of the parliament. The legislative assembly is a popular house. It is the real center of power in the state. It consists of members directly elected by the people on the basis of adult franchise. So how is this assembly? Assembly means group of people. So how is this group of people elected? They are elected by the people. And how are these people elected? On the basis of adult franchise, that is people above 18 years of age who are ready to vote. Okay, the strength of the assembly varies from state to state. So here in Tamil Nadu, if we have 234, that is each state will have a different number of legislative people. However, the maximum strength of the assembly must not exceed 500 or its minimum strength should not be less than 60. The term of office of the legislative assembly is 5 years. So totally the legislative assembly can be there for 5 years. It can be dissolved even before the expiry of its term. The size of the legislative council cannot be more than 1/3 the membership of the legislative assembly, that is the lower house of that state. So now you can see here legislative council and legislative assembly. So the size, that is how many people can be in the legislative council, it should not be more than 1/3 of the legislative assembly. So what is the other name for legislative assembly? It is the lower house, but its size cannot be less than 40 also. Composition. The legislative assembly of Tamil Nadu consists of 235 members, out of which 234 members are directly elected by the people from the constituencies on the basis of adult franchise, and one member is nominated by the governor from the Anglo-Indian community. So we already saw this in the previous class. So our legislative assembly has got 235 members, and out of that 234 members are elected by the people who are above the age of 18 from their constituency. Constituency in Tamil is Togudi. So for each constituency one person will stand. So from that they will elect. Cabinet and cabinet committees. A smaller body called cabinet is the nucleus of the council of ministers. So behind that we have a cabinet. A cabinet is again a group of people, and they are the most important people for the council of ministers. It consists of only the cabinet ministers. It is the real center of authority in the state government. The cabinet works through various committees called cabinet committees. There are two types, standing and hoc. The former, that is the standing, are of permanent nature, while the latter, that is ad hoc, that is the second type, are of temporary nature. The speaker. The speaker is the person who you would have seen in the, even in the parliament, who sits at the center and talks about several issues. The Legislative Assembly elects two of its members as the Speaker and Deputy Speaker. The Speaker may be removed from office by a resolution of the Assembly after giving a 14-day notice. So, the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker is one among the Legislative Assembly member, and you can resolve, that means you can remove them from their post by giving them a notice of 14 days. Such a resolution, that is such a final decision, must be passed by a majority of the members present at the time of voting. The Speaker does not vacate his office when the Assembly is dissolved. He continues to be the Speaker until the first sitting of the new Assembly. So, once the Assembly is dissolved, the Speaker need not vacate his position. He will wait for the next assembly to be set, and during the first sitting alone he will be removed. While the office of the Speaker is vacant, if in case the Speaker has been removed by a 14-day notice, the Deputy Speaker will perform his functions. The next we have the Legislative Council. So, that is called as the upper house. So, we have seen the lower house earlier. Now, we move on to the upper house. The Legislative Council is the upper house of the state legislature. The Vidhan Parishad forms a part of the state legislatures of India. In 6 of India's 28 states, the Legislative Council serves as the indirectly elected upper house of bicameral legislature. So, out of the 28 states that we have in India, 6 states they enjoy bicameral, that is two-way legislature. It is also a permanent house because it cannot be dissolved. Every member of the Legislative Council, that is MLC, serves for 6-year term, which terms staggered so that the terms of 1/3 of the member expire every 2 years. So, MLCs must be citizens of India not under 30 years of age. They should be mentally sound, that they should be really good, and his name should be in the voters list of the state from which he or she is contesting the election. So, if a person is from Tamil Nadu, that means the person voting should be in Tamil Nadu or in that constituency. Election to Legislative Council. 1/3 of the members are elected by local bodies. 1/112 of the members are elected by graduates of the universities in the state. That means 12 out of the 12 people, one person should be as a graduate. 1 out of 12 should be elected by graduate teachers. 1/3 of the members are elected by the members of the Legislative Assembly, which is the lower house. 1/6 is nominated by the governor, who is eminent, who is famous in the field of literary excellence, that is in the terms of language, art, social service or cooperation. The chairman. The chairman or the chairperson, or he or she, it can be a man or a woman, is the presiding officer of the upper house. The members elect a chairman and a deputy chairman from among themselves. In the absence of the chairman, the deputy chairman officiates the functions of the Legislative Council. So, you have chairman and the deputy chairman who has been a member, and they take care of the functions of the Legislative Council. Legislative Council, again, it is the upper house. Abolition or creation of legislative councils. So, abolition is destroying. Article 169 deals with the creation or abolition of legislative council in a state. So, which article talks about creating the legislative council and dissolving the legislative council? It is article 169. Article 169 holds that if the state legislative assembly passes a resolution by a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members present and voting, and by the majority of the total strength of the House, requesting the Parliament to create or abolish the State Legislative Council, then the Parliament may by law provide for the abolition or creation of the Legislative Council. So now what here we are trying to understand is 2/3 of the members should vote, and there should be a majority out of the total strength of the House. So if there is so much of majority, then they can abolish or they can create the Legislative Council. Functions of the state legislature. Legislative powers. The state legislature can pass laws on all subjects mentioned in the state list as per the constitution. It can also pass laws on concurrent subjects. So they can pass any kind of law related to the constitution. It can be on the current event also. The state made law in a concurrent subject will become inoperative when the center also passes a law on the same subject. Say for example, a law is being made with subject to the state at that point of time, and the same comes into the central government. So when the central government passes that law, the state government's law will become inoperative. The passing of the bill into law follows the same procedure as in the Union Parliament. Every bill passes through 3 readings. Then it becomes an act with the governor's assent. So any bill that is being submitted has to be accepted by at least 3 rounds. Then it becomes a bill, becomes an act by who has to give the final authorization? It is the governor. Financial powers. The legislature controls the finances of the state. So the legislature, again let me tell you, group of people who are making laws. Okay. The lower house enjoys greater power than the upper house in money matters. So the lower house will be enjoying power than the upper house in what matters? Money matters. Money bills can be introduced only in the lower house or the assembly. No new tax can be levied without the sanction and permission of the assembly. So taxes, relating to taxes, it cannot have access without the permission of the assembly. Controls over the executive. The council of ministers is responsible to the assembly. The ministers have to answer questions asked by the members of the legislature. They can be removed from office if the assembly passes a vote of no confidence motion against the ministry. So here if you can see, the council, that's a group of ministers who've been elected, they are responsible for everything that's happening in the assembly, and they can be removed by having a vote which is called as a no confidence motion, and by which the ministry can be resolved. Judiciary of state. We know this fact, judiciary, judicial means relating to judgment laws, okay, that is court procedures. High Court. The institution of High Court originated in India in 1862 when the High Courts were set up at Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. We know there are 2 courts that we often talk about, High Court and the Supreme Court, which is in Delhi. In the course of time, each province in British India came to have its own High Court. So when the British were ruling India, what happened is each province, that is like, you know, each state or each district, they started having a High Court. After 1950, a High Court existing in a province became the High Court for the corresponding state. So before 1950, it was for provinces. But after 1950, there was High Court for every state but not for provinces. The High Courts are the highest courts at state level. So for a state which is the highest court, it is the High Court. Now we have seen the High Court of Madras. The Constitution of India provides for a High Court for each state, but the 7th Amendment Act of 1956 authorized the Parliament to establish a common High Court for 2 or more states or for 2 or more states and a union territory. So what happened is, After 1950 we saw there was high court for every state, but then there was a change in the act which is called as the Amendment Act of 1956, where the parliament can establish a high court for two states to have one high court in general, or they can combine two or more states and a union territory, and for all of them they can have a high court. For example, the states of Punjab and Haryana and the Union Territory of Chandigarh have a common high court which is situated at Chandigarh. The High Court of Guwahati is common for four northeastern states, which are the Assam, Nagaland, Mizoram and Arunachal Pradesh. The High Court of Guwahati has its benches at Itanagar. Benches, it's like sub-courts. Okay, so that we need to understand. The next we have Kohima and Haziwal. So here I think yes, Kohima and Haziwal, Delhi, though not a state, has its own separate high court. Every high court has a chief justice and a number of judges. The number of judges varies from state to state. So the number of judges of each high court is determined by the president. So in every court that we see, the number of judges who are going to be there is determined by the president. At present there are 25 high courts for how many states? 28 states, including new Andhra Pradesh High Court, which was established in January 2019 at principal seat in Amaravati, and 9 union territories. The jurisdiction and powers of High Court. Original jurisdiction. In their judicial capacity, the high courts of the presidency towns, that is Bombay, Calcutta and Madras, have both original and appellate jurisdictions, while other high courts have only mostly appellate jurisdiction. So there are original jurisdiction is the original type, okay, whereas in the other one we have only appellate. Only in matters of admiralty, probate, matrimonial and contempt of court they have original jurisdiction. So what comes under jurisdiction, original jurisdiction? Admiralty, probate, matrimony and contempt of court. All these words I hope you know. For example, contempt of court is the court passes a law and when somebody goes against that we call contempt of court. Matrimony, we know it is for related to weddings. The Presidency High Court have original jurisdiction in which the amount involved is more than 2000, and in criminal cases which are committed to them by the Presidency magistrates. So you can see that criminal cases are being dealt, and for that the amount varies with respect to original jurisdiction. Appellate jurisdiction. As courts of appeal, that is what appellate, all high courts entertain appeals in civil and criminal cases from their subordinate courts as well as on their own. Now this is very commonly used word, when a incident is not favor of that person, they go from one court to the other asking for appeal. That is what is called appellate. There were, however, no jurisdiction over tribunals established under the laws relating to the armed forces of the country, but there you cannot go for appeal when it comes to armed forces. Writ. Writ means written. Under Article 226 of the Constitution, the High Courts are given powers of issuing writs not only for the enforcement of the fundamental rights but also for other purposes. So now you can see this is very important, Article 226, wherein the High Court has given powers for issuing writs, that is written laws, but you cannot enforce this for the fundamental rights. In exercise of this power, a court may issue the same type of writs, orders or directions which the Supreme Court is empowered to issue under Article 32. So as we know, High Court is a lower court and Supreme Court, which is there in Delhi, it has got the power to issue any kind of writ or orders that have been passed by the High Court. The jurisdiction to issue writs under this article is larger in the case of high courts, for which the Supreme Court can issue them only where a fundamental right has been infringed. Infringed is a small change or there is a small deviation. A high court can issue them not only in such cases but also where an ordinary legal right has been infringed. So, when there is a legal right which is being changed, they can issue orders. It has the power to issue the 5 kinds of writs which we have studied earlier in the previous chapter: habeas corpus, mandamus, prohibition, quo warranto and centuria. Supervisory jurisdiction. High Court has the power of superintendence over all courts and tribunals functioning in its territorial jurisdiction, that is military courts or tribunals. So, just now we learnt the High Court has got all the powers when it comes to the courts and tribunals, but it cannot intervene with military courts. Thus, it may call for returns from them, make and issue general rules and prescribe forms for regulating the practice and proceedings of them. This is what are the things that they can do. Prescribe forms in which books, entries and accounts are to be kept by them. So, these are all the supervisory jurisdiction can do. Okay. Settle the fees payable to the sheriff, that is the highest people there, clerks, officers and legal practitioners of them. So, here all this them consist of the supervisory jurisdiction. So, court of record. All the decision and decrees issued by the High Court are printed and are kept as a record for future reference by the court as well as by the lawyers in such a need arises. So, this is again a very important one. So, any decision that has been taken by the court is being printed and kept. So, this can be used for further reference by the court or even the lawyers. Thus, it is also acts as a court of record. So, this is called as a court of record. So, go through the lesson.